Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Case
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Tired of
Dowhower,
hearing about disappointments in fantasy in this sense.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
All right. Well, good evening and welcome to Injury Inquiries. I'm Chris Dowhower. I'm replacing your usual host, Dan Mater, but I am joined by the esteemed Danielle Dubois, and the doctor is also in the house, Mr. Brian Scott. Brian, you were talking as we got on the air. Lots of news to kind of jump into, so let's kick it off. Let's start talking about the quarterback position with Mr. Jordan Love. Jordan Love has been practicing in limited capacity most of this week. He's set to return. Is this a guy that I want to have in my fantasy lineup? And am I worried about long-term injury?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just watching the pregame show here on NFL Game Day, and the NFL insiders, and I use that term very loosely, were giving their injury analysis, which is pretty sad that they actually are on there doing that. So they were talking about how Jordan Love has been limited in practice the last 5 days or so, and they're excited because it means look, he could be ready this week, and it's a matter of him talking to the doctors and him feeling ready to go. And it's right at that 3-week time frame where they thought maybe he'd be available, but the window of time was between 3 and 6 weeks. And I don't care what I'm sticking to my 4-week timetable here. Yeah, it's great that he may be ready to go. He's going to need some more live practices, I think, under his belt before he's really feeling totally confident. Playing with a brace on to protect the MCL is feasible. Is it smart? No. Can he still get injured? Yes. And he'll be better off giving it another week so that he can play with limited bracing or even no bracing as opposed to playing with a bulky brace on his knee to protect the MCL. So I'm still going to stick with my 4-week timeline here. I think he needs another weekend to kind of get ready. Malik Willis has been doing an admirable job filling in, but if you want primetime Jordan Love and you want the best guy out there to lead your team into the rest of the season here, I think they'd be wise in giving him that another week to suit up.
Brian, if he was to play, what would be some of the things you're looking to be limited in what he'd be doing?
So certainly his mobility, that's going to play a role in his ability to scramble outside the pocket, his willingness to take a hit and stick in the pocket and get sacked, because you don't want that knee to get rolled up on again. And if he's playing with a brace, it's really going to be very uncomfortable for him. I think it's his back plant leg, too, which means that he's going to be a little bit limited in driving off that back leg to make any high throw with velocity down the field. So it could hinder him quite a bit, to be honest with you. And the only way to safely play coming back from this injury after 3 weeks, if he's still experiencing any pain or soreness, is with a brace. And that's going to be an uncomfortable thing to use.
Danielle, take on this, Minnesota Vikings defense. It's been awesome this season. Is there anything that could convince you that you'd stick Jordan Love in your lineup this week in fantasy if he was out there?
I wouldn't this week, but I would say next week I would definitely feel a little bit more comfortable just for that extra time. Also, like you said, Vikings defense, it could just be not necessarily the best matchup for me, but I really like him overall going forward, and I'm personally considering making some trades in my league for him as my quarterback. So
Nice. Speaking of another quarterback, Justin Herbert left last week's game on a walking boot. He is supposedly out of that walking boot. They're still iffy whether or not he's going to be able to play. Brian, what are you looking at when you look at Justin Herbert?
Well, the first mistake they made here was allowing him to play this past weekend, knowing that he was dealing with a mild high ankle sprain, which is what they termed it. And if you remember in episodes past and on my blogs, I've always said I'm very weary when I hear the term mild and high ankle sprain used in the same sentence, because often to get a high ankle sprain is usually much more tremendous amount of force than what you would get with any mild ankle sprain. So just hearing that he was trying to come back and play through that without any significant rest time and recovery time was a little concerning. And then lo and behold, he did re-aggravate it. He was in a walking boot seen leaving the stadium last weekend, and now he's out of the boot already. I think they're playing this poorly here with high ankle sprains, whether it be mild or not. According to their diagnosis, I would still rather see him take some time off and give this thing the optimal time to recover. And if they do rush him back out there again this weekend, he's not going to be fully recovered enough to be at all effective. So I think we should see him miss at least another a week or so, maybe even more. What they're planning on doing though looks like it's going to be complete opposite of that. So your guess is as good as mine, Dan. I'm sorry, Chris.
Well, Brian, not that we don't want to badmouth any, medical staff, but is this the same Charger staff that stuck, the wrong thing in poor Tyrod Taylor and, one was costing him his opportunity to be the Charger starter?
It could very well be. Yes, they punctured his lung when they were giving him an injection into the ribs several years ago, which is the saga of Tyrod Taylor's career. Unfortunately, he's had some pretty bad mismanagement of some injuries over the years. And yes, it likely is the same medical team, unfortunately.
Danielle, talking about making some moves in some of your trades, is Justin Herbert a guy who's been, banged up already this season, but a guy who's been one of the better young quarterbacks in our league? Is that somebody maybe you're looking to buy low on?
I personally am not looking to buy low on him. I was really high on him for the past few seasons, but with a high ankle sprain like we've discussed, it's something you take a little bit seriously, and the fact that he played last week and this could genuinely be a long-term situation that affects him throughout this season, I don't necessarily wanna take the chance on him, especially when I know there are some younger guys that are going to be available or that I could make a trade for that would be more consistent and that I feel more hopeful for.
Great advice. All right, so moving on positions, talking about the running back position and the guy that we care about the most, CMC, the number one player on most people's boards going into the season. Brian, am I supposed to flip out because he went to Germany? Is it suddenly now is he out for the season? Is there something I'm not reading right because he went to a different country to get some kind of feedback or advice? Or is this something maybe he's just, leaving no stone unturned?
Well, Chris, I could spend a lot of time talking about this. If you want the real inside scoop, you got to subscribe to the blog Inside the Medical Tent on our website, theinjuredlist.com,
Love it.
which is part of that sports podcast network. But what I will say is this tonight. It's not good. And you should be very, very worried if you're a CMC owner and if you're the 49ers. When players start going outside the country to seek alternative medical treatments, it usually spells disaster. And this could end up being, if not at the very least, a long-term injury. This could be season-ending. I won't get into too much detail as to why I believe that, but when you hear about players traveling outside the country to get alternative treatments, not good news, and you should be very, very worried.
So Danielle, pulling on from your background a little bit, you cover a little bit WNBA and talking about basketball. Kobe Bryant was a player in basketball who traveled to Germany to get some procedures, things done on his knees. Is this something that you're concerned about just as much as Brian is?
I am, and it was actually funny. I'm sitting with one of my friends yesterday, and he goes, "You need to see this fantasy football trade that I just got like requested." I was like, "Okay, let's see it." And it was 3 people for 1, and somebody wanted to trade him Christian McCaffrey. And overall, the deal wasn't for Christian McCaffrey, but I still told him, maybe don't take that deal. There's no need. But I was like, it's interesting that they threw in Christian McCaffrey, considering he's in another country dealing with an injury. That's obviously a very severe thing. And the fact that they even threw him in that trade just made me laugh so hard because I was like, what really? Like, we all know he's most likely out for the season and you're trying to trade for him. Like, that's so interesting. So, personally, very concerned, staying away from that, and very happy I did not draft him.
And Brian, where's that plug again? Because I think that's wonderful insight. People are definitely going to want to find out more about Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, so Andrew LeDuc of That Sports Podcast Network and we do a blog called Inside the Medical Tent. You can subscribe to it on our website, in theinjuredlist.com. And you get a little bit more inside information, a little bit more in-depth analysis as to why I have these injury takes. And Andrew gives some good injury roster management advice. to help navigate through this for your fantasy football rosters.
Very nice. And now, my fantasy roster this week, I want to know if I have Kenneth Walker going to be finally available to me, Brian. Come on, tell me Kenneth Walker is finally going to get out in that field for me.
Well, he's dealing with that oblique thing. Last week, it looked like he was going to be ready to go, and he was seen in warm-ups and stuff on practice day leading up to the weekend game, kind of favoring it. He should have had enough time to recover now. I think we will see him back. If he's been able to get on the practice field the next 2 days here, then I think this should be a return week for him.
All right, moving on. Other positions, Raheem Mostert has been limited again yet in practice this week. Limited last week, did not return, wound up being downgraded to doubtful. Are we going to have a chance for Raheem Mostert to return this week, or are we going to see more of what we saw last week?
I think we'll probably see more of what we saw last week. Unfortunately, Raheem Mostert, historically speaking, has not been very durable, and he's had a lot of injuries throughout his career. And just when you think he's coming back, either something else pops up or he ends up missing time. So I don't think we're going to see this change anytime soon with him, unfortunately. I'm very skeptical on his return this week. He's probably going to be listed as questionable. If he does make any type of comeback, it'll be probably not until a game time decision is made. So I wouldn't hold on to too much hope here. I'm not so committed to putting him in my starting lineup just yet.
Danielle, moving forward, Raheem Mostert. I'm a Christian McCaffrey owner. I took Raheem Mostert at 18 touchdowns last year's rushing, hoping to get something, but now 2 is banged up. Is there something with hope on to, or is this guy just letting go?
I mean, I personally have a little bit of hope, but I feel like slowly it's been kind of dying out. But I don't know. There's like a spot in my heart that like really loves Mozart, and I just have a lot of hope that he's gonna turn into something absolutely incredible. But most likely it's maybe not. So my best advice is maybe don't hold on to it, but I personally am because I'm an optimist.
Like it. So this backfield kind of, both guys sharing this backfield in Pittsburgh, both Jalen Warren and Najee Harris are both banged up this week. What are we looking for in Pittsburgh's backfield? Am I firing up Cordell Patterson, or is there hope that I actually can get one of these two out there?
I haven't been too much reading up too much on these guys, but it sounds like Najee Harris was just given a rest day. Whatever he's dealing with sounds like it's pretty minimal. I think we will see him. He's a young dude, very few years in the league. I don't think this injury has been reported as being anything serious. It sounds like he's just been giving some time off. So I think we'll see him just fine this weekend.
All right. Jalen Warren was a guy who did not practice and was trending, was limited last week. So maybe he will be in there another week in the lineup. He did actually split time with Cordell Patterson. So probably not a guy you want to have in your lineup regardless. But a guy that maybe wasn't in your lineup, but you're excited to see some flashes of the old guy of last year, and that's Austin Eckler. Went down with a concussion this past Monday. Is definitely going to be out for this week. Is Austin Eckler a guy that I'm worried about long term, or is this a guy that, hey, once this concussion thing moves on, maybe he can be back out there and get in my lineup soon?
Well, unfortunately, as with all concussions, it really is a subjective thing. They're going to kind of monitor him day by day. And unfortunately, with concussions, it typically ends up being a day by day kind of analysis here. So until you actually see him doing anything on the practice field, that means he's not nearly or even close to being ready. You have to be able to get through physical exertion and activity in order to basically be cleared. And so until you see guys step on the field coming back from a concussion, you got to be really weary as to whether they're ready to go. This is not one of those injuries where you don't get back on the practice field in time to prepare for a game and then suddenly make the starting lineup on Sunday. This is one of those things where you have to work your way back onto the field. That's the telltale sign that they're making their way back from a concussion, and that's just part of the NFL concussion protocol. So until you see him actually at practice participating, I don't expect him back. We'll have to see what happens next week and whether or not he gets back on the practice field, but as of today, he is not.
For you, Danielle, when the guy's coming back from something like a concussion, Brian's talking about definitely being cautious, but this guy practices and is supposed to be a starter. How cautious are you starting him in that week one back, or do you kind of sit him that week?
It's one of those things where I feel like it's very situational, and it depends on what my running back room is looking like. And if you do have Austin Eckler in your lineup, he most likely is your go-to guy. And you have really no choice at that point other than to start him unless you want to take two kind of mid-range running backs and just take the gamble for the week. But most likely, you kind of are just in that situation where you just got to hope for the best and hope he returns back to his full self.
Great advice. So moving on positions, talk about the receiver position. Oh, the poor Philadelphia Eagles, they're just suffering through all kinds of injuries, particularly in the receiving core. Both Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown have injuries. Devonta had the concussion, as we talked about, Austin Eckler with the concussion. A.J. with that hamstring. What are we looking like for Jalen Hurts' pass catchers?
Well, AJ Brown's dealing with this hamstring issue, and he himself said that it was going to be several weeks before we see him back. And as with hamstrings, like I always say, until you can actually get back on the field and ramp up your activity and get a full practice in, you never really know just how recovered you are, because it's really hard to simulate those game day conditions with a hamstring injury. So again, until we see him back on the field, I don't expect him back. It's only been, I think, a week that he's missed so far, one game. So could be more. I'm sorry, 2 games. I would expect maybe one more at the most. I mean, he's now going on to like the 4th week of his injury. So again, something to keep an eye on about whether or not he gets back on the practice field. And again, with the concussion thing, what you also have to look at, and this goes back to Eckler too, is the history there. Eckler's had 3 concussions throughout his career. He's missed multiple games because of it. And it has a cumulative effect. So the more concussions you get, the more the symptoms tend to linger, the more severe the symptoms tend to get, and the longer it generally takes for you to recover. So that also has to be factored into the decision about when these guys are cleared to play, and it also determines how quickly they can bounce back.
Danielle, with these guys having these concussions, do you think there'll be more trends with players trying these new helmets and trying different things, that are out there to protect their heads, or is it, quote unquote, not cool enough because it's this big balloon thing you look like you have on your head?
I think, and I at least hope so, because when you see how effective these caps are, it's a game changer. And the fact that we've seen specifically so many concussions in the last few years specifically, I mean, we've seen Tua go down 4 or 5 times now, and he's still super young, and it seems just a little bit more common than it used to be. And so I would love to see a lot more players taking these precautions so that they can at least have longer careers as well and not have to think about retiring at the age of 26, 27.
So 2 receivers need to get to Brian to talk about, right? Keenan Allen has a heel issue he's still dealing with. Jordan Addison dealing with an ankle. Both guys have been limited in practice. What are we looking for with these guys when it comes to limited? And like you talked about, when the guys see these guys kind of fire up and get going, can I just be confident if they just keep getting limited practices that they can be game ready?
I'd put my money on Jordan Addison bouncing back a little faster than Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen, the last few years, has really shown his age and his wear and tear here in the league. Apparently, from what I've gathered throughout the reports I've read, is that he's dealing with some type of plantar fasciitis.
Oh, I think we might have lost Brian for a second there. Yeah, but he was talking about plantar fasciitis. I think that was definitely the injury that he is suffering. That's something Justin Herbert also is suffering from. The poor Justin Herbert is falling apart. But, we look at some of these receivers, Danielle, are these guys, somebody that we are going to, plug in our lineups when we can, like a Keenan Allen and Jordan Addison, if I do have them healthy, or are these guys that, like we talked about the concussions, or are you going to wait and see?
I feel like for me, at least, it's a wait and see, especially just with the past, specifically that Keenan Allen has had in the past few years. I feel like the wait and see is kind of the perfect way to go for him because I feel like me and everybody else is a little bit hesitant with the way Allen is right now with his style of play and then just injuries that have accumulated over the past few years. So I feel like for him, the best advice I could say is to maybe wait a week. And if it seems like he's back to himself or can at least get you some consistent average points, then you can start sticking him in your lineup. But I always kind of err on the side of caution for injuries, especially someone with a little bit of a past.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I'm not one of the people who like to just plug guys in, especially if they're going to be on the snap count. I'm always worried about that. So when we get Brian back, we're going to dive into tight ends. But as we're waiting for Brian, we had Trey McBride have a concussion issue as well this past week. It seems like a lot of concussions. Talk about the helmet thing. The tight end position in general, Daniel's been a real dicey position for fantasy owners. Is Trey McBride somebody? If I don't have Trey McBride in my lineup this week, if there's somebody that maybe you're thinking you might look at, maybe in the Patriot uniform.
Ooh, interesting. I don't know. I feel like tight end's a tricky business. I mean, it seems like if you don't have Travis Kelce, you're kinda just suffering, but then we see this year that that's not necessarily the case, and this year, if you have Travis Kelce, you're suffering, AKA me. So if I can't put in Trey McBride, it would I would maybe take a gamble at Hunter Henry. The real question is just if the quarterback can get to him. I have him on my bench, especially after that Seahawks game. He looked really good, was getting almost all of the receptions except for, I think, one target to Pop Douglas. So it's kind of a gamble, and it really depends with him. So I wouldn't necessarily feel super confident telling you to ever take a Patriots guy and put him in your lineup. But if you want to have a little bit of fun and roll the dice, Hunter Henry could be your guy because when he gets the ball, he gets something done with it.
Yeah, if they just stop throwing the ball to Austin Hooper, I think it would be perfect. And the 49ers aren't a bad matchup, so it could be a guy to look at. If I do think there's a good chance McBride's probably going to be out this week. We don't have Brian, but we talked about the concussion thing. You have to go through protocol. You have to be cleared first. And this is one of their better players for Arizona. I don't see them necessarily trying to rush this guy back out. So I definitely think teams or people are going to want to look for alternatives. Hunter Henry or some other guys might be one of those options. Talking about another option. Go ahead.
Not to interrupt, but McBride also did not practice today, which means if he didn't practice by Thursday, most likely a no-go.
Yeah, probably not going to be a guy that you want to have in your lineup. Another tight end who did not practice this week and has a good chance might be out. Sam Laporta had a lower ankle sprain, so that's a good sign. It wasn't a high ankle sprain, the low ankle sprain. Laporta hasn't kind of been the star of fantasy that he was last year per se yet, but yet another guy that we do have, and you drafted pretty high to have in your lineups, probably have a tight end. Sam Laporta, if he's a guy that can't play this week, Danielle, is there somebody else? We talked about Hunter Henry. Any other guys maybe jumping to your mind that maybe you're looking at?
I'm just trying to go through all the tight ends in my head that I think could be somewhat good. But Zach Ertz, that also could be a good one. He's usually not too bad. I think this year he's kind of averaging points, nothing spectacular, but I mean, haven't really seen spectacular performances by any tight end, to be honest.
No, and I think that's a great call, Danielle. Actually, Austin Eckler, who's been one of the guys that Jaden Daniels has been looking to check the ball down to. Zach Ertz can kind of be that safety blanket. So it is somebody who maybe be on people's radar, has some value this week. And then a team that's Washington's been scoring a couple points, so they're looking good. Moving forward, the last tight end position is George Kittle, who did return to practice. George Kittle is a guy that I love, but is a guy that, going to take on your Patriot team. I know that's going to be hard. Do you think George Kittle is going to be a guy that we're going to see out there this week? And if he is he somebody that people should be playing in their fantasy lineups, Danielle?
If he's playing, I'm playing him as well. He's too good to be on your bench if he's coming back and he's healthy. Also, this Patriots defense has been shaky. We saw it at the beginning of the year. It seemed to stop the Bengals, no problems asked, only held them to one touchdown, and then it kind of all blew up since then. So I wouldn't be super worried about the defensive end of things. I would just be worried if there's going to be a certain snap count for him because I know he was limited in today's practice. So I'm assuming if he's out there, he's going to have a little bit of a timeline to how long or how many drives he plays, but you got to play him.
Definitely agree. And then finally, but not least, the Swiss Army knife himself, Taysom Hill, had a chest injury, was unable to play last week, should be returning possibly back this week in time to play Atlanta Falcons. Taysom Hill is a guy that can be that wild card guy who can get the ball and being handed to him, being thrown to him. Taysom Hill is that maybe a guy that we're looking at as when we're Laporta or our McBride options if we can't play them this week, Danielle?
Oh, easily. I kind of completely forgot about him considering he was out last week, but he is fully active, it says, and he should be ready to go. So, definitely somebody I would look towards. He's always a forgotten one, it seems like, in my mind, but he can get you some solid points. He's not going to be the worst.
I like it. I like it. So Danielle, before we get out of here, maybe we'll get Brian back when we'll get little comments if he can. But what are you working on? Anything that you want to kind of let the viewers check out? And where can we check you out at?
Yeah, you guys can follow me on Instagram at Danielle_Dub or on Twitter/X, whatever you call it, at Danielle Dubois. And if you guys aren't sick of my voice yet and you like to hear about hockey, then lucky for you, I have a hockey podcast called Round the Rink. It is live at 5 p.m. on Thursdays. And if you miss it live, don't worry. It's on Spotify and wherever you listen to your podcast.
I love it. And then just to let you guys know, Brian, even if he can't get on the air, is not taking any time off. He went to let you guys know that George Kittle is dealing with a hamstring, as he mentioned earlier, and they get him back full practice mode, but doesn't see him to being just ready quite yet. So maybe George Kittle will not be a guy that you have available to you this week. But I definitely encourage you all to check us out next week for injury inquiries. Dan will return. Daniel will be here as always. The doctor will be in the house. Appreciate you guys joining us and have a great weekend.
Hey there, I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.